This video is about the digestive system, some of its functions and the structures involved. The digestive organs include the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine. These are the organs that food passes through. Think of each of them like a chamber, and often there's an opening and closing to seal off each chamber. Internally, those are called sphincter muscles. Accessory organs are the organs that help aid in digestion, but food does not pass through them. Saliva glands, pancreas, gallbladder, liver, they help with digestion, but food does not go directly through these organs. Here you can see some of the locations of the organs of the digestive tract. So the mouth interacts with the saliva glands down the esophagus into the stomach. The food leaves the stomach into the small intestine. The gallbladder and pancreas are going to secrete into the small intestine. Food passes from the small to the large intestine and then out of the body. Each section of the digestive tract acts like a disassembly line. That is, instead of an assembly line where things are being put together, each part of the digestive tract works to take those food products apart. And it's going to take them apart physically or chemically. So either it's going to transform the food physically or chemically. The mouth and stomach do most of the physical digestion. The stomach and small intestine do a lot of the chemical digestion. The large intestine mostly reabsorbs water. So starting in the mouth, we have some organs: teeth, tongue, palate, saliva glands. It's important to notice that teeth are organs. They're definitely not bones. And you have a lot of different kinds of teeth. Your tongue also helps to mechanically digest the food. The palate, if you just take your tongue, run it from behind your front teeth up across the roof of your mouth, you'll feel the hard palate first, and then straight up, you'll feel the soft palate. And then saliva glands help to liquefy the food a little bit. And there's some enzymes in the saliva. Amylase especially breaks down complex carbohydrates. Here are the different types of teeth you have. Incisors bite, canines pierce, premolars shear or slice, molars grind. The two major components of saliva is water and amylase. So water helps to moisten the food. Remember, water is a universal solvent, so it's going to act like a solvent and dissolve things. Amylase, that ASE tells me it's an enzyme. Enzymes help to speed up reactions. In this case, the reaction is to break down complex carbohydrates. The tongue is useful for taste. Things like sweet, bitter, salty, umami, the kind of meaty flavor. Your tongue, as you chew, helps to form food into a bolus, a round kind of oblong bowl. We also use the tongue for speech. Once that food is formed into a bolus, we swallow that bolus of food and it begins to pass through our digestive tract. Our throat is our pharynx. In the throat we have the uvula and the epiglottis. Both of these structures are keeping food and drink out of the respiratory system. So as food is moving down the esophagus, the epiglottis gets pushed down to cover the trachea. The uvula gets pushed up to cover the nasal cavity, and that food passes through so that it doesn't get into your respiratory tract. The esophagus simply transports food to the stomach, and it does this by peristalsis. There's no digestion that happens in the esophagus. Peristalsis is just a rhythmic contractions of muscles. So think about a long tube, and here you have your food. You're going to squeeze here, and it moves a little bit. And we squeeze here, and it moves a little bit more. We squeeze here, it moves a little bit more. This is how food moves through most of your digestive tract. But in your esophagus, that's all it does. It just transports it from your mouth to your stomach by these rhythmic waves. The food then has to pass through the lower esophageal sphincter. So it's going from one compartment to the other, the esophagus down to the stomach. That lower esophageal sphincter is going to seal up food in the stomach and keep it in your stomach. Your stomach is a muscular organ. It's J-shaped, and it does stretch. It's usually about the size of two of your fists together, but it stretches, especially when we eat meals like Thanksgiving. If it stretches too much, it opens that upper esophageal or that lower esophageal sphincter, and sometimes the acids from the stomach go up into the esophagus, and we call that acid reflux or heartburn. There's a pyloric sphincter that seals the stomach off, so it's its own separate compartment, and the stomach does a lot of mixing, turning, grinding with all those muscles. You can see how they're in different bands so that they can move the stomach in different ways. All this is involuntary muscle. You don't control it. But the muscle has enzymes in it called pepsin that break down protein, plus hydrochloric acid, stomach acid. Those two together really act on proteins to start breaking them down in a dramatic way. Mostly chemical digestion for protein, physical digestion for everything else. When the stomach contents is like the consistency of a milkshake, chyme, then it's able to pass through that pyloric sphincter and into the small intestine. Because the stomach has so much acid, the lining of the stomach is a mucosa lining that secretes mucus that prevents the acid from eating into the stomach lining and causing an ulcer. Once the food passes through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine, it's going to travel all 10 feet. Now, those 10 feet are very folded, and even folded like an accordion fold. So if you were to measure the small intestine in a living person, it's about 10 feet. But when the person dies and all those muscles relax, all those folds flatten, and the intestine looks more like 21 feet long. The intestine is primarily involved in chemical digestion. Lots of enzymes help break down food chemically in the intestine. And then most of the nutrition is going to be absorbed from the small intestine into the bloodstream, or if they're lipids, by the lymph vessels. There's three major sections to the small intestine: the duodenum, which is first, jejunum, which is the middle part, ileum is last. Here you can see the folds inside the intestine. All these folds are just increasing the surface area. Along each fold, there's all these little finger-like projections called villi. Again, it's increasing that surface area so that lots of absorption can happen. All these nutrients can be absorbed into the body. Here we see how the fatty acids are going to be absorbed through the lymph vessels. This is one villi. You can see the capillaries in there, where the amino acids, the breakdown of proteins, the monosaccharides, the breakdown of carbohydrates, are absorbed into the bloodstream, but fats are absorbed into the lymph vessels. Lipase breaks down lipids. That ASE tells me it's an enzyme, and it's going to break down lipids like triglycerides into fatty acids that can be digested. Amylase, the ACE tells me it's an enzyme, breaks down complex carbohydrates, starches. Sucrase breaks down sucrose into glucose and fructose units. Maltase breaks down maltose into glucose and glucose units. Lactase breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose units. So you might know some people who are lactose intolerant. It's because they don't produce lactase, the enzyme. Pepsin acts on proteins and breaks them into smaller chunks. That typically happens in the stomach, but it also happens in the small intestine to some degree. And then trypsin acts in the small intestine primarily to break down amino acids into their smallest little parts. And then trypsin acts to break down proteins into their smallest components, amino acids. Remember that there's 20 amino acids, and amino acids make up proteins. So your body is trying to disassemble that complex protein into its individual amino acids. Then it can reassemble those amino acids into proteins. Polysaccharides are complex carbohydrates like starches, glycogen, like amylose, like pasta, things like that we would eat. We break it down to disaccharides, that they're double sugars. The double sugars are broken down into monosaccharides, those are single sugars. So if glucose and fructose are the products, then we know that the disaccharide was sucrose and that it was part of some kind of larger cane sugar. Proteins are broken down into polypeptides. Those are amino acid chains, and those chains are broken down further into individual amino acids, which can be absorbed into capillaries. Bile helps to emulsify fat globs. Then lipase can act on them to break it down into their individual parts. Those are absorbed into the lymphatic vessels. We're going to pause our trip through the digestive tract in the small intestine because here's where most of the accessory organs are going to act. The liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. The gallbladder stores bile that's been manufactured from the liver. That bile is injected into the small intestine in order to help break those fat molecules down. If the fat hardens, especially in the duct of the gallbladder, it's called gallstones, and it might block that bile. So whenever you're eating fatty foods, you might feel that pain, and often individuals have to have their gallbladders removed because of that blockage. The liver has lots of roles, but some of the roles include producing bile and also helping to metabolize proteins and cholesterol, processing some nutrients from things that we've eaten. But the liver plays some major roles in our body. Cirrhosis of the liver just means scarring, and often that happens as liver cells are trying to detoxify alcohols and break those alcohols down, but are unable to because it's just too much consumption of alcohol. So the liver tissue begins to die and scar tissue replaces it. So the liver loses its function. As a result of losing its function, rather than producing bile into the gallbladder, that bile begins to leach out into the bloodstream, travel around the body, and start to accumulate in tissues like the whites of the eyes and the fingernails, and they turn yellow. Accumulation of bile is called jaundice. And jaundice can be an indication of cirrhosis of the liver. It could also be an indication of hepatitis. Hepatitis is a viral infection, hepatitis A, B, C, D, and those infections get worse the farther the letters go. But that viral infection, again, affects the liver and it's no longer able to do those important functions. The pancreas sits right above the stomach. It secretes enzymes as part of pancreatic juice, and it secretes sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate acts as a buffer to neutralize some of that strong stomach acid. So as food is leaving the stomach and entering the small intestine, the duodenum, it's very acidic. So sodium bicarbonate helps to buffer some of that acid so that it doesn't cause an ulcer in the duodenum. The large intestine has several major parts. Food enters into the cecum, moves up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, through the S-shaped sigmoid colon, rectum, anus. The appendix houses bacteria. Those bacteria can help create a helpful environment inside of your large intestine. When food gets to the rectum, it's meeting the last sphincter muscle of the digestive tract, the anal sphincter. That expansion of the rectum sends a signal to our brain that says it's time to defecate. So we recognize we need to use the bathroom. If we're having a difficulty using the bathroom, that's called constipation. If we're having difficulty holding it in, that's called diarrhea. So constipation and diarrhea are both in large intestinal issues, but a lot of it has to do with some other thing. For example, diarrhea acts to flush out the large intestine, but the caution is that it may cause dehydration. The large intestine's primary goal is reabsorption of water. So if we have constant diarrhea, we're not reabsorbing water like we should be, then it can lead to dehydration. Hemorrhoids are a result of that constipation. So bearing down really hard, like during the defecation process, often causes the intestinal lining to bulge out of the anus, and those are hemorrhoids. If we're eating enough fiber, cellulose, so cellulose is a complex carbohydrate found in fruits and vegetables that we cannot digest because we don't have the enzymes to digest it. We call it fiber because it helps keep our colon clean. It helps move food through the colon in a progressive sort of way, and then defecation, and it makes defecation easier. I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about the digestive tract, its organs, and its processes.